Good afternoon. My name is Alyssa Miller, and it is my joy to welcome you to the Justice for Marcus Garvey Roundtable. On behalf of Broadleaf Books, the host, publisher of the forthcoming anthology that we will be discussing today, I welcome you. Broadleaf Books publishes works that expand the mind, nourish the soul, and cultivate the common good. I'd also like to welcome you on behalf of our partners in Literary Good, the African American Literature Book Club, the most widely used U.S. platform dedicated to Black books, Black writers, and the Black literary ecosystem. Next, our partner Diverse, Issues in Higher Education. They are the preeminent source of critical news, information, and insightful commentary on a full range of issues concerning academics. Diverse is the most widely read trade magazine for and about underrepresented groups in higher education. And Harlem Writers Guild. This is the oldest continuously operated Black safe haven for writers in the world. Thank you for being here, and shout out to all of you. We've had hundreds register: booksellers, librarians, academics, scholars, students, publishing professionals, book sale reps, and straight up history lovers. So thank you for being here for this important conversation. I'd like to invite my colleague, Reverend Yvonne Hawkins. I know her best as acquisitions editor at Fortress Press, but her full bio will be in the chat.
I want to invite us into a space of prayer as we engage into our discussion today. So, inspired by the lyrics from the group Sweet Honey in the Rock, let us pray. Oh God, as we gather today, remind us that for each child who is born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Remind us of the many, many ways that that we are our grandmother's prayers and we are our grandfather's dreamings, that we are the breath of our ancestors and the Spirit of God. Fill us, O God, this day with our mother's courage and our father's time as we live as daughters of dust and sons of great visions, as sisters of mercy and brothers of love, as lovers of life, and as the builders of nations. Forgive us, O God, this day for the ways that we forget who we are. And teach us how to live as seekers of truth, as keepers of the faith, as makers of peace, and as the wisdom of ages. Revive us today, O God, in the truth that we are one. In the name of Jesus, by the power of the Holy Spirit, we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Without further ado, I am privileged to introduce our roundtable speakers for today. You'll be able to see their abbreviated bios in the chat and on the screen. Welcome, everyone. Mic's on. Everyone that's looking wonderful. Thank you for being here and holding space together. You may notice that Troy Johnson is not on the screen with us. And he is based in Tampa, Florida, where he, along with thousands of others, have had to evacuate their homes due to the threat of Hurricane Milton. So I want to extend a moment of silence for those in his shoes at this moment and those still recovering from Hurricane Helene. Thank you. And now it is time. It is time to jump right into our discussion to try and answer this question: who is Marcus Garvey? To that end, I'd like to start with you, Dr. Julius Garvey. What a privilege and honor to have you in our midst. We are here to talk about your father, and he was known as many things, and among them was being the king of Pan-Africanism. So tell us, what is Pan-Africanism, and why is he known as the king of it?
Well, basically, Marcus Garvey was an Afro-Jamaican who created the Universal Negro Improvement Association, an African Communities League, in 1914 in Jamaica, and transited, shall we say, to the U.S. in 1916. And I would say that he was both an African nationalist, he was an anti-colonial champion, because of course the African world had been colonized in 1884, 1885, and this was post-slavery, which ended in 1838. So the organization represented the hopes and aspirations of, at that time, 400 million African people worldwide. He gave us the concept of us as a universal people with a home base, shall we say, on the African continent that had been colonized and needed to be reclaimed in terms of our sovereignty, not just as African human beings with dignity, but also continental Africa, which was our home and belonged to us and needed to be recaptured, if you will, and shall we say, taken over from the colonizers. So this is basically what his mission was over the period of his life. And that's the foundation of Pan-Africanism, meaning that it's the unification of African people. It's their self-identity in terms of being the original people, the original human beings on continental Africa, with the original civilization, who have been degraded by Europeans in particular in terms of their slavery experience, but whose star again was rising based on his concepts and the unity of African people at that time. So we can call him a Pan-Africanist, we can call him an African nationalist, we can call him an anti-colonial champion, if you will.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And for those of us who are learning about Marcus Garvey for the first time, will you put this into a time frame for us? So he's unifying African descent people across the globe. And when was this happening?
Yes, as we mentioned, the organization was created in 1914, and there was the First World War was 1914 to 1918. So this was an intense period of global change. And of course, I mentioned he came to the United States in 1916. So this was a very, very interesting period when many Africans fought, Africans both in America, or from America, shall we say, or from the Caribbean and from Africa itself, fought in this World War. And supposedly they were fighting for freedom and democracy, when of course their own countries were not free, meaning that they were colonized. And of course, in the United States, we had sharecropping, and we basically Jim Crow, and we basically had the Ku Klux Klan running wild on the apartheid system here in the United States. So this was a period then when there were significant changes going on. And because of the World War, many, as I mentioned, African Americans participated in the war, but also other Americans participated in the war. And this was also a period of industrialization. And because of the movement of the workforce involved in the war, there was openings in the north in terms of the industrial process, needing more workers. So many African Americans migrated north. And between the decade from 1915 to 1925, more than 1 million African Americans migrated north. So there was a movement then from the plantation, from the farm to the city. So this was a period then when African Americans were becoming urbanized and were becoming industrialized. And of course, it was also a period when African Americans were coming together in relative large numbers in terms of the ghettoization that they ended up in these large cities such as Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and New York. So it's a period of intense change, and African Americans as well as other Americans were seeking a liberty, equality, and democracy during that period. And this was when the UNIA, Marcus Garvey, had its a great impact because he had an ideology that fit into that milieu.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great segue. I've spoken with each of you individually outside of this. And Miss Richards, I know you've shared with me that I believe it was your grandfather who actually, directly was a part of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was founded by Marcus Garvey as a part of Pan-Africanism. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. And I just want to say to Dr. Garvey, I am so honored to be in your presence. And you are a son loving his father so much that you are committed even now, 100 years later, to seek the exoneration of him. And I am just so honored to be in your presence and with all of my colleagues. But this is a righteous cause. Now, my grandfather, Aaron Tolliver, was a great leader in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and he was born about the same time as Marcus Garvey. And he went to Milwaukee, and of course, to me, he was he was outspoken. That's why I'm sort of loud, guys. You can tell me to modulate my voice. He was outspoken. He fought. He was a power to be reckoned with. And there is, they took him down too, because he was the leader of the dock workers, and he brought them all together. And he worked with the unemployed, the homeless, Black people. He was constantly bringing Black people from the South up north. But there was a man named George Hamilton who headed up the United Negro Improvement Association in Milwaukee. And I was told that Marcus Garvey came into Milwaukee and that my grandfather welcomed him in. And so I've been searching and I am convinced that my grandmother OB cooked a meal, they sat down at a table, and they talked business. So
I love it. Well, and Ms. Richards, what I love about that story is it brings home the fact that this was not some isolated organization that lived in one place, but this was a full-on movement. And I think the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, is just one facet that shows the breadth and reach of the work of Marcus Garvey. And it's so important that we remember that. Are there any other thoughts on that before we move on? Mr. Coase, I can't tell if you're unmuting. Okay. Excellent. So this is crazy. The breadth and the reach of UNIA, the mission to unite African descent people globally. This is no small thing. And it seems noble. So what is the issue? There were concerns, serious concerns, even among Black America around what was happening with Garvey's philosophy and his movement. So let's talk about that. What was at the core of those concerns? Anyone?
Well, clearly Marcus Garvey articulated a particular philosophy that was African-based in terms of the autonomy and the sovereignty of African people. in terms of their history, traditions, and culture. And the world at that time, certainly the country at that time, was basically quite racist. It was specifically, we mentioned before, the Ku Klux Klan was rampant. Racism was systemic, as it currently is in terms of the United States of America. It has been shut down, for example, in South Africa in terms of its apartheid there. But capitalism is a racist economical system. It's built on the backs of African people. The educational system is racist in that it's built on a false history of Europeans in terms of Greek civilization being primary. And you can go all the way across it in terms of religion, in terms of justice. The judiciary system is racist. African people are criminalized here in the United States to a great extent, and to a greater extent than the policing is racist, etc. So this was what was being fought against. Now, what was happening at that time is how do you solve these problems? What is the way for African people to recover their freedom and their liberty and their dignity as human beings? As I mentioned, Marcus Garvey's philosophy was African based. There were other philosophies. The 1917 period, there was the Russian Revolution, a communist revolution in Russia. So both communism and socialism were being broadcast as solutions to the extractive nature and the classism of capitalism. So there were African Americans who favored communism. There was the African Blood Brothers. There were those who favored, shall we say, socialism and you might say the trade union movement, such as Philip Randolph. And then there were the integrationists, such as at that time the NACP and W.E.B. Du Bois, who felt that integration and appealed, shall we say, to the majority of America, meaning white America, to be more liberal in their relationship with African people and to expand African privileges towards full citizenship. That was the other alternative. So these were contending, shall we say, for the hearts and minds of African people at the time. So one group was critical of the other group, shall we say, and that was the milieu.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in here? Dr. Garvey, as a born and raised Jamaican girl, I just want to say it is my extreme honor to sit here with you and to meet you virtually. And I stand with my colleagues in saying, you're doing an honorable thing, and I'm so grateful and honored to be invited to share space, to, of course, exonerate the first Jamaican national hero. Having said that, I completely agree with you. The polarization at that time was immense. I got my PhD. I'm a political scientist by training at Howard University. So my focus is on international relations and Black politics. Understanding Black politics at that time with the Talented Ten, the Boys and WNCP, and WNCP, as well as the UNIA, was a polarizing contrast. My dissertation focused on building a nation within a nation. And I talked specifically about what Du Bois was talking about, where we're a country, we're a Black people, and we're living in the United States as a nation. But we have our own way of speaking and communicating and networking, which is very different from the capitalistic, Eurocentric ideology. But we have to adhere to that. To your point, policing, economic disparity, marginalization, and prolific political polarization. Marcus Garvey, of course, believed in going back to Africa, being among our people. Being raised in Jamaica, we know that racism, that type of racism was not there. It is so enlightening to learn and to see how much of a discord that they had, on economic, disparity, whether it is Pan-Africanism, separatists, integrationists. It is so interesting how that all come together. But we have to look at now that these things are still very relevant today. We're still seeing the separatists and we're still seeing the integrationists, and we still cannot come up as Black people, come up with a way or a movement to help each other. Africa right now is talking about the Back to Africa movement. We see it in Ghana, we see it in Kenya, we see some other countries coming out now with the Back to Africa movement, which is in line with Marcus Garvey's ideals. And then we see also the reversal of so much so much policy and politics that the civil rights movement brought forth, like affirmative action. We see women and being marginalized out of our society. We still see the polarization. So it makes me question, as a political scientist and a Black politics scholar, Marcus Garvey seemed to have been on the right path, and how do we reconcile that? So I thought that was very powerful. I thought that was very insightful, and it is definitely a template in interrogating the way forward.
In preparing for this, something that really struck me in themes from the book Justice for Marcus Garvey, which you edited, Dr. Garvey, and many of you here on this in this discussion contributed to the book. And in the little that I knew of Marcus Garvey, I attributed to the Back to Africa movement. But what I missed in that narrative of learning was how much he organized so that those who chose not to go back to Africa and to stay, he said, all right, so what are you going to do while you're there then? How are you going to mobilize? How are you going to sustain? How are you going to empower? So I didn't know the breadth and reach of UNIA. I didn't know that. Well, talk to me more about what else was happening on the ground within the Black community as a result of this broader Pan-African mobilization that affects the Black community now, that we do hear about in our civic history. We just don't tie it back to Marcus Garvey, other than UNIA. Does that make sense, the question? What thumbprints, what landmarks, what do we still have here that were left for those that decided to stay within Black America?
So just can I go? Okay, so I just want to say first of all, Dr. Garvey, like everyone else, has paid tribute. I'm here to pay tribute. Okay, and so my preference is to listen to you and to be in class with you. So I'm just going to throw something out because I want this certainly to be a part of our discussion. I think one of the things we want to look at Marcus Garvey about and never forget is the power of this man to organize globally against a system of global oppression. So Garvey distinguished himself. It's not that he's the first, he definitely was not the first person of African descent to see the problem confronting Black people to be a global problem. But he became the most prominent advocate of looking at the world that way. So to look at Garvey and to think of Garvey as back to Africa, there's an aspect of that. But Garvey is looking at Africa because he understands he's confronted with a worldwide system, a global system of oppression for Black people. And he comes up to confront that system. And he encourages us to look and confront that system. And I think in that respect, some of what Garvey taught, some of what Garvey preached and advocated for then has been lost because so many folks here, particularly in the States, and we get this criticism from brothers and sisters around the planet, we focus solely on what's happening in the United States. And there are organizations that look at Black people in this country as if we're somehow distinct, as if our oppression is somehow distinct from the oppression that Black people confront themselves with all over the world. So in that respect, some of Garvey's teachings were lost. And at the same time, even as I say that, Garvey is what gives hope to those of us around the world who do unite, who understand that we're the same people no matter where we were dropped off the boat. If we were dropped off in Cuba, we're the same people. We were dropped off in Jamaica, we're the same people. In Trinidad, if we were dropped off in England, we're the same people. And that's how Garvey saw us. And I just want that to make sure that that is fully embraced in this conversation about Garvey, because it's what I feel gives him his power. He's our leader there. He's our prophet. He's our God. He's our Moses there. He's the one who points more than anyone in our history to the collectiveness of us all. And I'm off mic.
I think one of the things that's important to understand is the degree to which he elevated the consciousness of African people worldwide. Black consciousness, if you will, meaning for us as a people to be conscious of ourselves as other than people who were enslaved. Because, as you know, the narrative at that time was that we were somehow, cannibals in Africa, and we were rescued and brought over here, and we should be happy to be slaves. Well, my dad turned that all around. And he said, the black skin is not a badge of shame. It's a glorious, a symbol of our humanity. This manifested itself throughout the United States of America. The whole Harlem Renaissance was based on that elevation of black consciousness when we became so creative, whether it was in jazz or in terms of writing, in terms of dance. That was a whole period of the explosion of black creativity. So, and if you look at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King gives credit to Marcus Garvey in terms of his own inspiration. So was Malcolm X, and we can go down the line, whether it was Black Power movement and so on and so forth. So it was an elevation of consciousness of African people towards their own dignity as human beings, which had been denigrated, had been dehumanized, for when he was around for 250, 300 years. Now it continues for 400 years and more. But if you look again at his influence, every Caribbean leader who sought independence from Britain or from France owes it to his understanding of Garveyism. The same thing in Africa. Whether it was Kwame Nkrumah or Nnamdi Azikiwe or Nelson Mandela or Jomo Kenyatta, and I can go on almost endlessly. All of those owe their fight for independence of their countries on the African continent to the work of Marcus Garvey. And it's people who are trying to belittle the movement who say it's a back to Africa movement, as if to say he was trying to solve the problems of black people by moving back to Africa. That was never the situation. And the Black Star Line shipping line was not just to transport people back and forth, but to transport goods and services, manufactured goods and services between the African continent, the Caribbean, and North America. So, there's been a lot of negative caricaturing of Marcus Garvey and the movement. That's done by a system that lives on propaganda and lies to maintain itself. So, as African people, we have to understand that.
That's so good. And I think that segues perfectly into what happened legally to Dr. Garvey. I mean, clearly he was making an impact if the federal government decides to get involved. So maybe Attorney Parker Norman, could you talk some, and I'm open to others as well, about what was Marcus Garvey convicted of?
Sure. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for letting me be here in this space, Dr. Garvey. You know how much I appreciate just getting to know you. Quickly, I grew up with Jamaican parents, and so Marcus Garvey was always a hero to me, and I did my research, and that's how I came to find people. But to jump into answering your question, In June of 1923, June 22nd, 1923, he was convicted with several other UNIA members for basically using the mail to defraud the public. So it was supposed to be a conviction to defraud in the sale of the Black Star Line stocks. And so it was in the Southern District. And they basically, the federal government, first they infiltrated the organization. They had several spies that they planted. In fact, the first federal black spy was to infiltrate the UNIA. That was back in 1919, before the charge. And then after they had several plans put into the organization, they couldn't get him on anything else. They first tried to get him with the man's charge for, I guess, having a relationship with Amy Ashwood. That didn't work. And so then they tried to do the mail fraud conviction, saying that when he was soliciting at the UNIA meetings through the Negro World, the newspaper, to solicit $5 stocks, that was a fraudulent scheme because there wasn't actually the Black Star Line shipping boat. It wasn't really viable at the time. That's the argument the government put forward. Obviously, there's been review of the case. It's been found by many historians to just not be factually accurate. At the time, shipping was taking a big hit right after World War One. So, and then there was also, as an organization trying to purchase the ship, he was dealing with people overpricing the ship. There's actual, evidence of infiltration and sabotage. And the shipping company was meant to do more than just, quote unquote, going back to Africa. Like Dr. Garvey said, it was meant to try and bring in goods. And one of the core tenements of the UNI organization was financial independence, economic independence. And so among all the different companies that this organization started, not to mention the supermarkets, the doll factories, the Negro World newspaper. I mean, the list goes on and on about the international impact and the different factories, the nurses organization that they were doing at the time, giving Black Americans and Black people around the world independence in their own manufacturing. This idea that they would have their own shipping company and actually able to link, African goods back to America, I guess was, at the time, too scary for the federal government to handle. And so they couldn't get him on any other charge. They charged him and I think three other people, Ellie Garcia, George Tobias, and Orlando Thompson, with the scheme to defraud. First, it was a conspiracy charge in 1922. Then, when they couldn't really show the conspiracy, they just dropped the other defendants and they only charged Marcus Garvey. He appealed, and then in 1925, he had to face a maximum sentence of 5 years for mail fraud. But there was such an uprising at the time from the public, from jurors who came out and said he shouldn't actually do the full sentence. Like 9 of the 12 jurors actually signed petitions to say he shouldn't do the full sentence. And so at that time, President Coolidge commuted his sentence and he was immediately deported. But it just shows that there was really, J. Edgar Hoover at the time was the leader of the FBI. He was placed to kind of infiltrate and take down this organization. It just shows the, COINTELPRO with Martin Luther King, all these, the way the FBI has this organization of infiltration and taking down these organizations for civil rights really started that pattern with trying to infiltrate and take out Marcus Garvey because of the impact he was making. Under the guise, initially, the federal government said it was trying to combat the rise of communism in America. And so that's what the official toll was. But it was, if you go through the records, it was littered with, racist tropes and ideas. And the speed of which and the breadth of the organization, I think, was very intimidating. I mean, it had chapters in South America, Central America, Europe, all over the United States. And so as the charismatic leader he was, touring all over the United States, all over the world, having Negro World articles that would talk about what's happening in current events, the fastest way to undermine the organization was to, give him the false charge of mail fraud or, trying to scheme and then deport him as quickly as possible. And so that's basically what the government did. And I'm please expand. I'm just curious and I researched this and I'm doing my best to help out.
Yeah, I just want to add something to that in terms of the trial itself. The judge who presided over the trial, Judge Mackey, should have recused himself because he was not only a member of the NAACP, supported the NAACP, And at that time, the NACP was by and large antagonistic to Marcus Garvey and the UNIA. And they had also subscribed to that campaign, the Garvey Must Go campaign. Several prominent members of the NACP had sent a letter to the Attorney General that Garvey must go and he should be investigated over fraud. Well, I refer you back to what I said earlier on, that there was a battle of ideas at that particular time for the hearts and minds of African American people. And the NACP was one protagonist. So he should have recused himself, and he did not recuse it. He refused to. So that was totally, totally illegal. It should have been a mistrial. The prosecuting attorney suborned perjury. He coached the lead witness to perjure himself, to say that he worked in the mail department of the UNIA on a certain date. When it was shown at the trial, my dad defended himself because the legal system, the lawyer that he had wanted him to plead guilty, and he fired him. Anyway, it was brought out that my dad brought it out that this fellow, a 19-year-old fellow, who was a mail clerk at some point in time, but never worked in the mail department at that particular time when the letter was supposed to have been mailed. Plus the fact, the only thing that was produced in evidence was an empty envelope with nothing in it. And the person who got the envelope could not remember what was in it, could not state what was in the envelope. So he was convicted on the basis of an empty envelope that had the UNIA stamp on it, on the front and on the back. So it was a UNIA envelope, and that was the evidence used against Marcus Garvey. And he got 5 years in prison and $1,000 fine, which was like the maximum at the time. So clearly, the whole idea was to destroy Marcus Garvey, because at that time and up till now, he had an organization that had the largest number of followers, certainly in the diaspora, if not, no, certainly not on the continent, but certainly in the diaspora up to that time. He had in excess of 6 million people as part of the organization in 40 different countries with more than 1,000 branches. So this was a threat to colonialism. It was a threat to the apartheid system here in the United States. And the nature of the trial was purely political, to destroy Marcus Garvey, as they did later on with people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. So that was the beginning of it, as Safiya mentioned, in terms of COINTELPRO. This were the same people that brought down the Panthers and killed them in their homes, etc.
I just want to jump in real quick behind Dr. Garvey and Safiya, because I really want us to keep in mind that, again, Garvey's approach was looking at Black people globally. And so literally every colonial power that existed in the world had an effort to jail Marcus Garvey and to take him out in some way or the other. The United States ended up with the honor or dishonor of doing just that. But he probably was one of the most watched men in the world, and certainly the most watched Black man in the world, because every colonial power was threatened by Garvey. His articulation of the unity of our Blackness and the beauty of our Blackness, as Dr. Garvey was saying later, threatened every colonial power. And they would have taken him out. The United States actually took him out.
I'd like to jump in here and just talk about, so we've heard some of the background and what has occurred so far related to the Right Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, our very first national hero. Since he was incarcerated and released, there has been an unrelenting outcry to correct the historical record and clear his name. And this has been from individuals, groups, and even organizations. And the one thing we know about this giant is that he clarified for us the question of our identity. And he reminded us that it is grounded in our African roots. Oh, us. That not only Black lives matter, but that our Black lives are valued and indeed treasured and worth living. And of course, you can see that that is a threat to those who don't honor us. So in 2016, Dr. Garvey, Julius Garvey, and his legal team invited the Caribbean American Political Action Committee to help to support the efforts in petitioning the Obama administration for a posthumous pardon for his dad. And we jumped in and said, absolutely yes. Many of you on this call are part of that group who assisted. I wanted to share with you that prior to the Obama administration, though, the requirement for a petition to the president and the mandates that an official response is received from the administration was 5,000 signatures within a 30-day period. Now, at the start of the first Obama term, that number changed from 25,000 signatures, and at the end, it was 100,000. So, what we did with Dr. Garvey's full support and the petitioning board from his legal team was we reached out to the Americas, North America, South America, and the Caribbean. But despite our efforts, we collected less than 40,000 signatures. Now, during the Trump administration, they did not activate the petition portal. And that portal, as you know, was We the People. And that wasn't done until much later in the administration. So during the Biden administration, what we did was instead of just looking at North America, South America, and the Caribbean, we decided to make this truly global because he is a global figure. And so we did 5 continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, and South America. And I tell you, if you saw his words in Japanese and Korean and Chinese, it really warmed your heart to know that he is still alive and well, not just in the English speaking area, but all truly global. To date, we have not heard back from the White House. And I can tell you that we kept some of our data and we are confident that we had more than 100,000 signatures in that 30-day period during Black History Month in 2022. It's important to note that the Garvey pardon process, the group is continuing and has continued to fight for this, not just his exoneration, but his pardon. And we're looking at all hands on deck to make sure that this gets done by the end of the Biden administration. And I want to say to you, I leave you with the words of the Right Honorable Marcus Garvey. He said, "We will not lose courage. We will not lose faith. We will go forward and take advantage of every opportunity. And where there's none, we will make it for ourselves." So I'm going to ask everybody on the call, everybody who's listening in, to make sure you send something to the White House. Send them a letter. We have continued and we are undaunted and we will not stop until they hear from us. And as Dr. Garvey said, I want my daddy's name to be changed and cleared before I die. And Dr. Garvey, I promise, you know, I've been doing this. We're going to continue working until every ounce of blood drops out of us. We are going to get this done.
Right on, Goulda. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
Dr. Goulda, is there a link? Is there a link
Yes.
to the portal at the White House that maybe we can share so that people can have
Well,
access to
we're telling
that?
you to send a letter to the White House because the portal is within a 30-day period. And we have not started another 30-day period. And maybe that's something we want to think about. But right now, we're asking you to send a letter to the White House. Send it to them. Just send it. At the very least, we know that they got our 100 and odd thousand signatures, have not responded. And I'm speaking with Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett from the Virgin Islands, our governor from Maryland, Westmore. We're sending letters to him. We want everybody to do this. And they must hear from us and they must respond. We are going to insist on it.
I just wanted to add on to what Paul Coates talked about, Marcus Garvey's influence worldwide. One of the things is that he emphasized Black unity. He emphasized Black pride. He came before. I remember James Brown saying, "I'm Black and I'm proud." Well, Marcus Garvey was saying that before James Brown, okay? And the fact that we need to be independent and socially, economically sufficient. These are universal directives that he gave to us. But for me personally, the Black pride is what really resonates. I remember my grandfather refusing to let us have white dolls. What do little girls love? They want baby dolls. Well, we could not have white dolls. We had to have black dolls. Why? Because black is beautiful.
And also,
One of my favorite quotes. Oh, no, I was just gonna say really quick that one of my favorite quotes by Garvey is that they can shackle your hands and your feet and your body, but they can't shackle your mind. So even the phrase from from emancipate yourself from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our minds. I feel like even that was manifested by Marcus Garvey. It's one of my favorite quotes.
It really is overwhelming to think of the reach. I can't remember now who said it, but as we've been naming, I mean, we're talking shipping company, newspaper, so across media. I've heard financial industry and banks, doll company. I mean, this was no small thing, and it's just blowing my mind that when I walked around the University of Minnesota campus, so this would have been the largest public university, in Minnesota, but perhaps in the Midwest. And I asked over 20 students if they've heard of the historical figure Marcus Garvey, and each one said no. And I think even more disturbing is when that's happening on our historical Black colleges. So there was another person in history who also was set on carrying the legacy of Dr. Garvey's work forward, and that was his wife, Amy Jackie Garvey. Would you be willing, Dr. Garvey, to talk some about her role in keeping the legacy alive?
Certainly. My mother was a very dynamic person, very strong lady in her own right. She was both his disciple as well as his cohort. She met him in New York. She was also from Jamaica, by the way, but she met him in New York at one of the meetings, and she had legal training in Jamaica. She was well educated, and she offered to work for the organization, and she worked initially as a secretary, then they got married later on. But she was very instrumental in organizing the books of the organization. She was very instrumental in the Negro world. She did the female column. They had a column for women, so it was quite progressive in terms of female presence. And of course, they had also a female presidents of the different branches of the UNIA. So it gave cognizance to the shall we say, the co-workers and the battlefield, shall we say, or the battlefront, with women at the side of men. So she was also quite independent. So they had a lot of discussions about what he was doing and how to do it, etc. And she was, I would say, his intellectual equal in that sense. She also played a significant role in terms of pulling his work together in terms of his speeches as well as the editorials in the Negro world. And this was done at the time when he was in prison, and she put those together in terms of editing the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, volumes 1, 2, and then subsequently there was a volume 3, but at that time, the volumes 1 and 2, which preserved his speeches and his writings for posterity. So that was of extreme significance. He approved of this, of course. And then, subsequently, when he was deported to Jamaica, and of course, both myself and my brother were born there. She was an excellent mother to us. And then after she was a member of the UNIA in Jamaica. And when he died in 1940, we were back in Jamaica. We'd been in England with him for a while, but because the war was coming up, etc., we went back to Jamaica. And when he died, she carried on significantly the organization from Jamaica, holding different branches of the organization in the United States together. Because, once he was deported, etc., different branches, you might say, wanted to become autonomous in terms of individual leaders here in the U.S. So there was sort of a battle for who was leading the organization. And she was very instrumental in holding several of the branches together. Um, so she contributed significantly. Also, she encouraged many young Pan-Africanists, if you will, or students who wanted to know about Marcus Garvey, wanted to know about the organization from the inside. People like Rupert Lewis, people like Tony Martin, Bobby Hill, etc., and several others who came to her for counsel and for information relative to the inner workings of the organization. And she carried on a significant international correspondence, like, for example, leading up to the 1945 Manchester Conference. She communicated with Kwame Nkrumah, W.B. Du Bois, and several others who were organizing the conference, etc. What's the name from Trinidad? So, she continued his legacy after his death, and of course, she was significant in raising myself and my brother. My older brother, passed away 2 years ago, but he participated in the organization and was the president general here in the United States for a period around the 1994, etc. So she raised both of us to understand what my father was trying to do in terms of the essence of Garveyism, shall we say. And I think that both of us took that to heart because, as I just mentioned, my brother became President General. And my own proclivity, shall we say, I became a medical doctor, surgeon. That's the direction in which I have gone in terms of my own contribution to my people, per se. But she was a very significant influence to me and my brother, as well as carrying on the legacy of my dad.
I think it's so meaningful to think of the role that she played in the midst of how many roles she was holding. And it makes me think, so much of the channel by which she held the legacy was through scholarship and writing and the curation of his ideas in the written word. Dr. Sekai, I don't mean to put you too much on the spot, but could you talk some about the power of scholarship and preservation of works, and perhaps Mr. Coates too, because of Black Classic Press and what you do there curating works, but between the two of you, the importance of that kind of curation in activism.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I wanted to say that, though I knew that he was married and, your mom, mothered two beautiful children, I was awed and impressed by all that I have learning about her in preparation for this. Like, I did not know about her multiple writings and her activism and the three books that she edited for Marcus Garvey. I did not know that she was publisher. I was just so impressed with her. And I know, being a Jamaican woman and also in publishing now, I can see and hold my head just a little bit higher, in honor of the legacy that she's left. In addition to, of course, publishing and curating and archiving work, because publishing and recording history is really archivist. We have to hold those things true so that the truth can be told. Safiya and Dr. Downer could not do their work if we did not have somebody chronicling the history of everything that she has done. You talked about, her, of course, going in and getting the books together, reconciling the books, making sure that we can have the documentation. That type of archiving work is so powerful and instrumental, not just today, but also as well back then what she was doing. She has influenced prolific scholars, of course, Bell Hooks, Assata Shakur, Winnie Mandela, Angela Davis. Her inspiration and her legacy has gone on forever. So I am totally impressed and in awe of the work that she did. And you're right. I mean, she wore so many hats as a mom, having her husband imprisoned, being able to raise two strong young men who are now carrying on the legacy and in continuing to influence so many of us, the next generation, to carry on the work. She was indeed a phenomenal woman and a legacy and a powerhouse within our own. And I will pass it to Paul, to my big brother, Paul.
So I know our time is short, and how much time do we have? Because what I have to say, I'll turn it over to Dr. Garvey if we don't have that much time. Okay, sure. So I'll try this really quick. We do publish. We probably publish more books on Marcus Garvey than any other publisher at this point, because we acquired, after Tony Martin's death, the wonderful library of Garvey books that he researched and put together and wrote. It's so important that the work of Amy Garvey be preserved, and it's very important that the work of Marcus Garvey be preserved. And I think on the one hand, there's the preservation of the work, there's the publication of the work, but there's also a responsibility and an acknowledgement of the importance of that work that's been done by Black booksellers. So I'm bringing this back to the booksellers that are booksellers and book people who are in this collection that you've published it broadly. The wonderful thing in working with people to gather their opinions of Marcus Garvey to the person, whether it was man, whether it was woman, who contributed, they all acknowledged when and how they were influenced by Marcus Garvey. Imagine a network of conscious booksellers across this country owing their consciousness to what we've talked about today, the Blackness that we've talked about, the unity of African people. And these are the people who are responsible for curating books. That's not every bookseller, but it was enough booksellers that we could participate with Dr. Downer and bring together people in the community to participate in the exoneration effort of Marcus Garvey. It is important that we hold up, that we celebrate our own. And the way that that's done in our lifetime is preserving, publishing, and making known their words through books. I'm a child of Marcus Garvey. I'm a child. And I just want to add that the person who did the introduction on this book, the man of the hour, who's not on this call, Mr. Ta-Nehisi Coates, is also a child of Marcus Garvey. He cut his teeth on Marcus Garvey and did his first academic paper, his first academic paper in dramatic reading, I will say, on Marcus Garvey and one of Marcus Garvey's letters. So look, I thank you. I'm grateful for being on the call. Dr. Garvey, as everyone else has acknowledged you, thank you so much for all that you've done to hold up your father, your mother, and our legacy and the history that they conducted and conveyed on to us. So thank you for extending that.
Yes, absolutely. I think the gratitude, I can feel it through the screen that the gratitude is thick. And I know that this conversation needs to continue on even beyond the roundtable. So for all those that are registered, we will be sending a follow-up email. And in that email are two really important things. There's several things in there, but I want to call out two. There will be a reader's guide that will go along with the book, Justice for Marcus Garvey, that comes out November 19th. And that reader's guide is really just a one-pager that allows us to dive into these discussion points. Who is Marcus Garvey? Who can he be? What are the ideologies? What were the pushbacks? And allow us to engage with a broader narrative than just he was a Back to Africa movement person. The other resource is tying to what Mr. Coates said, that there's books on Garvey carried on not just by Amy Jackie Garvey, but several others, and they can be found at African American Literature Book Club, through Black Classic Press. Several of our indie booksellers are selling them. So we've rounded up these resources for people to find. And with that, I just want to say thank you, and thank you to all of our guests for coming. And we hope that you will buy the book and continue to seek out resources to learn more about the legacy, and to send that letter to the White House, as Dr. Downer called us to. Thank you.
As first academic paper and dramatic reading, I was. So look, I thank you. I'm grateful to be on the call. Dr. Garvey, as everyone else has acknowledged you, thank you so much for all that you've done to hold up your father, your mother, and our legacy and the history that they conducted and conveyed on to us. So thank you for extending that.
Yes, absolutely. I think the gratitude, I can feel it through the screen that the gratitude is thick. And I know that this conversation needs to continue on even beyond the roundtable. So for all those that are registered, we will be sending a follow-up email. And in that email are two really important things. There's several things in there, but I want to call out two. There will be a reader's guide that will go along with the book, Justice for Marcus Garvey, that comes out November 19th. And that reader's guide is really just a one-pager that allows us to dive into these discussion points. Who is Marcus Garvey? Who can he be? What are the ideologies? What were the pushbacks? And allow us to engage with a broader narrative than just he was a Back to Africa movement person. The other resource is tying to what Mr. Coates said, that there's books on Garvey carried on not just by Amy Jackie Garvey, but several others, and they can be found at African American Literature Book Club, through Black Classic Press. Several of our indie booksellers are selling them. So we've rounded up these resources for people to find. And with that, I just want to say thank you, and thank you to all of our guests for coming. And we hope that you will buy the book and continue to seek out resources to learn more about the legacy, and to send that letter to the White House, as Dr. Downer called us to. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, all.
Good.